Okay.
How's it going, Robert? It's great to get you on the podcast. We've been working towards getting this thing scheduled for quite some time now. At this point, I'm really excited for our conversation.
Same. Sorry, it's taken a few attempts to get here, but glad we finally made it.
Yeah, no worries. It's difficult for like security people to do like hour-long calls like this during the summer, because like all of our conferences kick off April May timeframe, and they go all summer long. And especially if you start doing like B-sides conferences and everything else, right? Like that's all the time.
Right.
It's
Do you enjoy the conference thing,
you
or
know
is it like
I like DEF CON, right? I don't like all the vendor stuff. All the
yeah,
vendor stuff, you're just getting sold all day long, and it's really frustrating. So I'd rather go to like DEF CON or a B-sides conference, something that's way less vendory.
substance? You're looking for the substance, right?
Yeah. I'm not looking to be sold something. I went to RSA a couple years ago, and I hope I never go back. Like, in all honesty.
Yeah, I haven't been to an RSA conference since the last one was before COVID happened, and honestly, I got to say I don't miss it at all. So
Yeah, I went to the one. I think it was like the one in 2021, right when they came back from COVID or
right,
whatever, and it was like
right.
a super spreader event. I'm like, oh my god. I only walked the event or the vendor floor maybe 2 times, and I was done. Like one day I did half of the room, and then the next day I did the other half of the room, and it was just pointless for me to be there, honestly.
Yeah, I've always found the best times at RSA are when you get people to meet you at places outside of the Moscone Center.
Yeah,
Like if you can get them to meet like a cool coffee shop or one of the hotel lounges. I just always felt that was where the
yeah,
real action happened at RSA.
yeah. That's what I would prefer, honestly. Right? Like if I'm gonna make the
Right.
trip out to California, I already don't like going there. Right? Like, it's, uh, might as well like show me around a little bit. Take me to a restaurant or something. I don't want to meet you at the conference room.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm exactly in the same spot as you.
Yeah. Well, Robert, I always start people off with telling their background, right? How they got into IT, how they got into security, that sort of thing. And the reason why I start everyone off there is because, um, I find that having that background, if you need to like let your dog in or out, that's totally fine.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just give me
Oh,
just
no
give me one
worries.
second here. All right. Sorry about that, Joe.
No worries. Yeah, so I start everyone off with talking about their background, right? Because I think it provides a lot of value for people to hear everyone's background and say, oh, maybe I have a similar background, right? And if he did it, maybe I can do it too, right? So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so my background in the cyber is a strange one. I started off as a horticulturalist out of all
Huh.
things, right? Which is plants, if you're not familiar. Uh, and when I graduated, I started working for an environmental company that was doing a lot of irrigation systems in Southern California, San Diego mainly. And they were in the process of moving all the irrigation systems from analog to digital. So, of course, being one of the fresh guys out of college, they were like, hey, can we send you to some computer classes to learn how to make these swaps on our behalf? And so I just kind of fell into technology. A lot of my training in college was in the field of science, obviously. But there was a lot of design aspects, which surprisingly has led into where I'm at today, right? So from those initial technology classes that I was jumping into in the mid 90s to where we are today, I have found that I continue to pull back on things that I learned in college, like in the School of Agriculture. I went to Virginia Tech. Horticulture is in the School of Agriculture. You have to spend a lot of time in economics classes because
Oh,
small business finance, economics is a big part of agriculture, and you have to understand how that works. So a lot of the economic principles I've applied into the job that I have now and what we do at X Analytics. So it's actually worked out in a really sort of strange way. You could never sort of predict this path, but even the way like viruses propagate isn't too dissimilar how plants propagate, right? The way that viruses work in the plant system isn't uncommon how viruses work in the computer systems. So there's all these strange correlations that I have found from where I started to where I'm at today that again, you can never sort of plan a path like this, but I have found to take advantage of every little bit of knowledge that I have and combine it in a unique way that really sort of created the career that I have in front of me.
huh. That's really fascinating. I've done over 200 episodes, and horticulture is not one of those backgrounds that I've gotten. I've had
Yeah,
opera
yeah.
singers on, I've had, cyber warfare mercenaries on. Uh,
Musicians probably, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. So, you said that when you were in school, right, studying horticulture, you had to study economics as well. Is that because maybe the industry in horticulture or agriculture overall is more small business focused, right? Like you're not going to go work for, a really large company, right? Like here in technology, you can go work for Apple or Google, a household name worldwide, right?
Yeah.
But maybe in that industry, it's more common to go the small business route. Is that like what it is, or is there another reason behind it?
I think that's part of it. you know, Virginia Tech is one of the few land grant universities in the country. That's where I went to school, Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech's really built on the foundation of many of the founding fathers of our country. And something that I think a lot of people don't understand about the founding fathers is that many of them were part of this Enlightenment philosophy. Um, Even Catherine the Great of Russia, right? She was in this Enlightenment philosophy, which was to intersect science, technology, math, and the arts together. And Virginia Tech, in order to graduate, at least at the time that I graduated, they wanted to make sure that you were well rounded by the time you completed your 4 year degree. And so that well roundedness included that you had to be part of the arts, you had to be part of science, you had to be part of technology, you had to be part of mathematics. And obviously, for me, in my field, some of the mathematics led directly into economic classes, right? Micro and macroeconomics. But I think on the big picture too, if you also think about agriculture, especially you live in Chicago, right? Agriculture has been something that's been traded on the Chicago Stock Exchange for a long time. And so I just think there's a direct association between how agriculture works and how the stock market works. And obviously, you're right. A lot of, at least historically, a lot of the farms, a lot of the horticulture businesses, the nurseries were small businesses. Today, that's changed a lot, right? They're part of mega corporations. But back in that time, absolutely, they were part of small businesses. So having that foundation in finance, having that foundation to understand how to balance the books in an organization, pay your liabilities, but then also weaving it all into the bigger picture of macro and microeconomics, which is something that was part of the philosophy of Virginia Tech at the time. I hope it's still there. I have a strange feeling it's probably not there anymore, but I hope it's still there.
Yeah, I really feel like everyone should take some economics classes, either in high school or, in college, right? Like because that information is so much more valuable than like learning, how to write a paper in English class. I mean,
Right.
honestly, it really is, and that's coming from someone that's getting their PhD, right? Like, you can learn the things of like how to write a paper properly through a couple drafts. You have a patient professor. It's like, oh, okay, you need to structure it like this. You need to use this terminology, or whatever it might be, right? Like, you can learn those things really on the fly. But economics, I find myself, I grew up in a poor family, right? I mean, we didn't realize that we were poor, but looking back on it, it was like, wow, we were pretty poor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like money wasn't discussed of like how it works, right? How it can work for you and against you, of how these things all matter, right? And like that was the most challenging part for me. When I became an adult, I had to then you know learn that, right, and teach that to myself. And it took me a couple years actually to actually learn it, how you're supposed to like actually know it, like, oh no, this is what a bad loan looks like. My
Right.
very
Right.
first I look back at my first car that I bought, right? I never should have leased it. I should have financed it, right? Should have put more money down on it, right? Shouldn't have accepted the insane interest rate that I got because it was my first ever, car loan and whatnot. All of those things, I I had no clue that they were bad. No clue.
Right. But I do feel like you have to learn through those mistakes,
Yeah.
right? And sure, you could learn some of that academically, but sometimes I think the best opportunity for learning is the mistakes that we've made, right? And clearly you've made those mistakes, so you're probably wouldn't approach a car loan in the same way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it stuck with you. You learn the realities of the decision that you made, and I think that is a fundamental difference between things that are academic and things that are learned in real life, especially in the field that we're both in. Is that um, you can read about something, you can learn about something through a lecture, but until you actually experience it firsthand, I don't think it really sticks. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it doesn't really resonate in how you make decisions moving forward.
Yeah, especially for me, how I learn is by doing, right?
Same.
And if I
I'm the
don't
same.
understand that something is wrong, or um, you know, like it shouldn't be a certain way, right? I don't realize it until I do it, and like I think about even like my current, like my sports car that I have, right? Again, it was a bad situation, and I learned, oh, I can't go into it, you know, excited, right? Like
Right.
I
Right.
have to be a better salesman when I'm excited about the car. I'm like a closet car guy, Um and so like I just like started getting into cars, and the guy showed me, the right, like he knew exactly what he was doing. Obviously, he does it for a living. Um and so it's like, oh, I got to learn this lesson again, or I got to learn it a different way, but the same thing in technology. And there's so many people out there that are afraid to mess up, and like
Right.
I
Yeah.
talk about it on my podcast a lot, right? When I was fresh out of college, I mean, I very embarrassingly like destroyed a bank's database of our product, right? Just like very inadvertently, very innocently, ran the wrong command, had too high of privileges and permissions than I should have had, right? And I, I went and destroyed their database, and I'm sitting here like, man, I just started this job. I'm about to get fired. Like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
But the VP gave me the opportunity to learn through that mistake. He's like, well, I hired you because I knew that you would make mistakes, and when you did make them, I knew that you would solve them, right?
What a great boss, though. Right.
Right. Not many
Yeah.
people are going to give you that opportunity. And that's probably why people are so worried about making mistakes now, right? Because they don't want to get fired, but you have to make the mistakes to really learn it.
This is one of the things that I find fascinating, and for some colleagues that you and I have that overlap, I have these discussions with them, and it, I always struggle, especially for somebody that's new at a CSO role. They don't want to share their findings directly with their boss or bosses, and
Mm,
whether that's the CEO or corporate directors or whoever it happens to be. There's this hesitance, like, well, I know that's my cyber risk condition, but mm, I really don't want to share it. And I find that to be the strangest thing. It would be like a CFO saying, well, we know what our tax rate is, but I'm not going to share it because there's going to be an adverse reaction to it. The CFO is
Yeah.
just going to share it, right? Or if the sales numbers came in poorly for the quarter, the CFO is just going to share that revenue went down, right? Because sales numbers came in poorly. It is what it is. And I find it so odd in the world of cyber that there's this hesitation to share the reality of the circumstance. And I think it gets to what you're saying, where people don't feel like they can make mistakes. Even, by the way, I don't think the cyber risk condition is a mistake of the CSO. Um,
Right.
but but there's this natural sort of like feeling, I can't share that because it's a reflection of who I am, or I can't make a mistake because it's a reflection of who I am. And I think that in itself is a huge mistake in our overall industry.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an unfortunate consequence of, I feel like, punishing too harshly, right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
I remember when I was working for a credit bureau, and they had the culture on the security team was, if you cause an outage, you're done by the end of the day, right?
Oh,
There was
wow.
people there was people that caused outages, in the middle of the night during a change window,
Sure.
and
Gonna
they
happen.
were they were let go by the morning.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
it
What
was
about
that
like
kind of,
somebody running a vulnerability scan, which is a requirement that could cause
oh,
an outage?
yeah,
Same.
do not let it go down. And that was just the culture, and that was a terrible culture because there was a lot of pressure with it, right? And one day, our solution, we had just recently upgraded it, and our solution created um an outage that was quick. It was quickly contained, but the damage was very significant. It took us, a week or so to actually recover from the damage that it did. Nothing technically went down, but it was in a state where you're resetting 10,000 service accounts, and you're resetting 40,000 other accounts, right? And all that sort of stuff. And my intern was the one that made the mistake. It wasn't even a mistake. It was a business as usual test. The product literally had a break in it that we didn't know about. She did the job that she was supposed to do. She did everything that she was supposed to do, and it caused this issue, right? And she
Yeah.
was nervous about reporting it because, like, she immediately thought, okay, this is my last day here. Like, I'm not even out of college. This is my last day here. Like, I'm screwed. This is off to a terrible start for my career. And my boss, or my boss's boss, actually, he tasked me with doing like a on the spot, like, forensic analysis of what happened, who did what, because his boss was going to say, did you fire whoever did it?
Right. Somebody's
Like,
got
that
to be
was the
blamed.
first,
Right.
yeah, that was the
Yeah.
first question he was going to get. And so he tasked me with that, and I, showed the proof that it was her, and he started walking away, and I had to stop him like, literally mid stride to, firing her, and say, hey, this wasn't her fault. Like, this is what happened. The product, broke. The product let us down, right? This vendor let us down. It wasn't her fault. She did everything that she normally does. I mean, she did it 2 days ago, right before the upgrade. And but, like, it brings me back because that culture, that mentality, it, like, really carries forward in a significant way. And I remember when, fast forwarding a bit, every time I find like a glaring vulnerability or a glaring hole in an environment, I now don't really care. Right? Like,
Right.
if
Right.
it I don't care in terms of like telling people about it, right? Because I'll find the issue, and then, like, my CISO will ask me, the question, well, what did you find? I was like, well, do you want the full detail? You want like a cherry picked version of it, right? And he'll ask for like the whole truth and whatnot, and I'll be like, okay, I found all of this. I found this stuff that we've been, hiding under the rug, or I found these dead bodies over here. Like, we need to figure this out. Like, that sort of thing. But and that's just my mentality, right? But I know other people that went through that same incident that I went through, and now they're in a situation where they constantly feel under pressure to not mess up.
Yeah, it's a it's a strange thing because I in the story that you gave, I always think, does that hold true for other departments in the business?
Yeah,
And sure, I understand there's a huge need for technology to be up and running all the time, right? It's just the way that the world is today. But at the same time, there are mistakes made in marketing. There are mistakes made in sales. There's mistakes made in product development and product execution. There's mistakes made in how the CFO and the accounting team does their job. And ultimately, it's always to get to the truth, right? It's always to learn from past mistakes, and it's always to try to figure out how do we solve our problems and get better. And the reality is that a business is always a series of problems that need to be solved, right? Nothing's perfect in business,
right.
all considering the world's changing around you, right? At the same time. And so, I just get this sense that IT and cyber is in this unique position inside of corporations today, where the other departments just kind of operate differently, almost organically, in a way where they can adapt and maneuver and make mistakes and overcome mistakes. I find it very strange. And so I don't know if it's self-inflicted, as it's a culture thing, or if it's a real thing. And sometimes I think it's self-inflicted, right? It's the culture inside those departments that continue just to perpetuate that. And I'm not so sure that it's that same feeling sits with the CEO or sits with the corporate directors of the business, who are risk takers by default, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a bit twofold. I think it is the culture within security and the mentality that we're all taught, right? I mean,
Right.
like you're taught this not even in school, you're taught it from peers, right? On this side of security, you have to be right every single time, 100% of the time. And that one time that you're not right, it could lead to the entire company being breached and us being out of a job,
Right.
right? Like having that mentality means that you're having a no fail mentality, right? And then I kind of go back to like NASA's mentality of no fail, right? And what that means for them is no, we're going to fail. We're going to fail in controlled ways, right? We're going to fail in as many controlled ways as we possibly can. We're going to think of literally every single thing that can go wrong, and we're going to try and prepare for it. And then having, the coding in a way where I think it's like fault tolerant or error tolerant coding. I mean, it's probably a different term, right? I'm not a developer, so I don't know it offhand. But it's this type of coding that even when errors happen in the code, the critical systems are still running because they're all
Yeah.
segmented out and they're
Right.
so well protected from each other that there's no stopping the engine before you want to stop it, right? There's no stopping the navigation before you reach your destination or whatnot. And those things all matter, right? And they're applicable in our world too, right? Because you have to approach security from the mentality of, okay, if this endpoint were to be breached, well, what's the blast radius of that, right? Are we
Right.
giving up everything because someone clicked on an email, or are we giving up 1%? You know?
Yeah. Joe, to dig into that, so take NASA, right? I mean, obviously, if you go to the race to the moon, right? No red moon, right? John F. Kennedy. They made a lot of mistakes. They couldn't get rockets to launch. Unfortunately, astronauts lost their
Yeah.
lives in that process through testing, right? But it was all, and then we almost lost Apollo 13 on its mission to the moon. Thankfully, they got them back. But there was a lot of mistakes that were made in the race to the moon, but they learned a lot through those mistakes, right? And now you're right, we're in this age of NASA, especially like from the two shuttle explosions, right, in the 80s, and I think the last one was in the 90s, where they became really risk adverse. But then all of a sudden, all the successes and progress in NASA stopped as a result of being risk adverse, right?
Yeah.
Like it had to take a company like SpaceX, Elon Musk, to sort of fuel them and perpetuate them into the future, which even SpaceX was on the verge of disaster because they couldn't get their rockets to work, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel that all great things happen through failure. You have to be willing to fail. And, there's all sorts of concepts in engineering like fail fast, right? So that you learn from it. But, to dig into cyber, I find this interesting because, Joe, I'm not sure if you're familiar with like what we do, but we help organizations understand their cyber risk condition, but then ultimately we help give them options so that they can decide what to do with that condition, right? And we basically simplify cyber risk management for them. But what I really wanted to get into was that I'm analyzing tons and tons of data on a regular basis related to losses inside of cyber. And, the losses really aren't that bad. Sure, nobody wants a loss to happen, right? They don't want a data breach situation or a ransomware situation. But if you really look at the full volume of all things that have happened, it's really not that bad, right? I mean, take the biggest IT outage in the history of IT, which was CrowdStrike this past summer. No outage has ever been as systemic as that outage. And, in the Fortune 1000, just over 0.25% of the Fortune 1000 were directly impacted by that outage. Of course, we hear about Delta, right? They lost $500 million from that outage. But in the big scheme of things, companies continue to go on, right? I mean, think about it. Like out of the Fortune 1000, did any of those 250 or so go out of business because of the CrowdStrike outage? No, they've continued, right?
Yeah.
Even CrowdStrike in themselves, who caused the outage, their stock, took a hit, but clearly CrowdStrike's on full recovery mode right now. They'll probably shake this off. 2 years, we'll be like, oh, whatever happened with that CrowdStrike outage? And we'll be laughing about it, right?
Yeah.
The largest fines inflicted on data breaches go to Meta, right? Facebook. One of those fines alone was $5 billion. Sure, some companies would be crushed by a $5 billion fine, but Meta continued on, right? The only real damage that I see is happening to small and medium businesses, right? When not the large corporations, but when small and medium businesses have too many events, cyber being part of those events, that take place together in a short period of time, do they tend to be in a situation where they can't recover, right? Obviously, is it where you live, Lincoln College, Lincoln University, right? After COVID and then the ransomware incident, they just had to shut their doors, right? That was a university that was open for, I think, more than 100 years, and they had to close their doors, right? So you do see those circumstances, but generally it's compounded situations. It's not just the cyber event all by itself. So the reason I bring this up is you can fail in cyber. Most organizations can fail in cyber, have an incident, deal with the consequences of it. It's not ideal, right? Sometimes it's bad for shareholders, but you can deal with the consequences of it and continue to move on. It's not detrimental. It's not catastrophic to the business. And I think if more people realize that, then maybe this culture that you and I are talking about would start to correct itself.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because that culture is very different in, like you said, in other parts of the business.
Right.
I mean, for you to be the CEO of really any company, you're there, you got like a few screws loose, like talk about pressure, talk about stress and risk,
Yeah.
And those guys are typically like very, very big risk takers in some ways, and
but they have to be, right?
Yeah,
it's the only way a business will survive,
because that's how they
because
got
if you
there.
play it safe, you'll just eventually evaporate as a business.
Yeah, that's how they got there.
That's how they got
the
there.
only way.
Yeah.
Like, and with Elon Musk, right? Like, I mean, he has bet everything that he has owned several times over. Like, he's not even worried to do it anymore.
Right.
Which is, it's a lesson that everyone can really learn from, I think.
Yeah, do you watch Bill Maher at all on HBO?
Not very much.
I like to tune in, not every week, but every now and again. Have a glass of wine on a Friday night, tune in just to see what's happening, see what his guests are saying. But he does repeat something quite often on his show, where when people on his show are risk takers, they're taking a chance, they're being bold, regardless if everybody hates their opinion or not. He always celebrates their boldness. And he always says that he believes that for the people that are bold and make bold decisions, it will always work out in the end for them. And I think there's truth to that statement. Like I really do. I think that in general, if you're bold and determined, you continue to have that motivation to move forward, it will work out for you. It's the people who give up. It's the people that are afraid of making decisions, that indecision, that I think generally leads to dire consequences.
Yeah, that's very true. And like whenever people are making like a career change, right? Or they're trying to, just for sake of this podcast, they're trying to get into cybersecurity from something else. I mean, that takes a level of boldness to think, I don't know anything about this area and I'm going to get into it, like that really, that takes some guts.
And you're doing it, Joe, right? You're doing it.
Yeah.
You started this and now you're doing it, and you've done, what'd you say the other day? Like more than 200 episodes already, right?
Yeah.
So that's the boldness, right? That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I also look at it. I remember when I was deciding to do the podcast or not, right? I was looking at it from the angle of, well, what happens if I'm like 60 or 70 years old and I look back, will I regret not doing it? And I thought that I would, because I like connecting with people. Me and you, like, we'll be talking, fairly regularly, right? Like once a year, like we'll talk and see how each other is doing now. Without this platform, that wouldn't be possible at all in any way, shape, and form, right? Like I would be nervous to even just reach out to you, but now I don't care who I'm reaching out to. I'll reach out to them,
Right.
Which, yeah, I totally would regret it. And I have a personal rule too, where if that answer is yes, I will regret it, then I absolutely must do it. And there is nothing that can stop me. Right. Same thing with when I was trying to get into security. I thought I could be successful at it. Right. I didn't know how successful I would be at it. But I knew that if I didn't try, I would regret it. And so then, like by default, I literally had to give it everything that I had, and I couldn't stop until I gave everything. And I was just about to stop too. Like I gave it everything that I had, and I was just about to stop, and then I go and I get 2 offers in the same day. Like, okay, there's something here.
That's the boldness, right? That's the reward. It's kind of like magic, right? It works out. It happens. I feel like too, like when you're right at the bottom is when sometimes the best things happen, right? Like right when you're ready to lose everything or you're ready to give up, but you just have that little bit of perseverance. I feel like that's always where like those amazing things happen, is at that bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how I have found that when I go to, new levels, it's like a new level of anxiety too, right?
Right.
My wife and I, we built our first house, right? This is our first house. I'm in it right now. Our first house, we built it, which is
That's
no
a hard
small
thing to do, by the way.
it's no small feat, and I don't think that we really realized that, right? We were trying to buy, but buying didn't really make sense because the market was so inflated at the time, right? You're going to spend $700,000 for like literally the house that I have right now, and then you're going to be spending another $250K fixing it up, making it, livable and whatnot, and it just didn't make any sense, right? And when we finally moved in here, like we obviously reached a new level together, with getting the house and whatnot. But then I had like a new level of anxiety, right? Like something that like crippled me for like a week, It's just like I'm so nervous. I don't know if I can make this payment. What did I do here? Like I'm a failure. Just going through all of this stuff, and I had to stop myself. I think I actually had a friend that like stopped me and was like, "Hey, like you're fine. It's gonna be okay. It's new. It's different, but you're gonna get used to it." And now, it's totally different. Like I'm not even worried about it. I'm more frustrated that my mailbox is crooked as hell that I
Right.
put in than anything else, right?
But you've relaxed into it, is what
Yeah.
you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable in the beginning, but as you get used to it, as you get used to that level, it gets easier. I think that's something that people forget about or they miss often.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to accept, right, your own reality
Yeah.
and just contend with it for whatever it is. Joe, I have a special needs daughter. She's going to be 20 on Sunday, by the way.
Oh wow,
And she's one of those kids that after she was born, the doctors are like telling you she's probably not going to make it, right?
man.
And we heard that throughout her childhood. Of course, the doctors were wrong, right? But she's with me all the time. I take care of her. She's with me all the time. And and I get these people who come up to me and they're all like, "Oh, God bless you," or "You're such an amazing dad." I don't even think about it that way. I think about it as that's my reality, and I accepted it very early on. I didn't fight with it. I wasn't angry about it. And of course, like back when Olivia was younger, people would ask, like, "Are you angry? Do you wish that you knew so you could have aborted the child?" Or
Mm,
and like I'm like, no, like
yeah.
I, I'm I'm happy. Like this was a gift in my life. And so I think perspective, the point I'm trying to get to is I think perspective allows us to really operate in a way that is normal and anxiety free and allows us to really find the joy and the beauty in the things that we're doing. Like I personally love cyber risk, right? I enjoy the space that we're in. I love being a father to Olivia. I have two other children too, and I love being a father to them. It's all different. Every one of those circumstances is different, but I just accept them for what they are and love them. And it allows me to just operate with a certain amount of peace and an anxiety free attitude that could be totally different if I was full of anxiety, right?
Mm,
Like if I was angry and anxiety, then I'm not good to them. I'm not good at my job. I'm not good to anybody. But interestingly, there's a lot of people I think that focus more on the negative than the positive. And part of it maybe is a little Buddha like, but you just sort of have to, I think, let go of the suffering, right? Like just let go of it. And then once you let go of it, I think everything in your life, including your job, is easier. It's better.
hmm. Yeah, I think people often go down that path, right? Of, oh, do you wish that you would have known that unknown or whatever might have been, right?
Yeah. The
But it's
uncertainty.
like, people are they're coming at it from, oh, I don't know about that unknown in my life. I don't know how that's going to change me. I don't know how that's going to impact everything else around me, and um yeah, that's a really incredibly tough situation. Like you mentioned that, doctors were telling you that, she wasn't going to last very long and whatnot. And I think back when my first kid, I only have one kid right now, but when my first kid was born, she had a pneumothorax, right? And one of the doctors I really didn't like. I didn't trust
I
her.
had I had some I didn't like either, if that makes you feel better.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really did not like her, and I met her for maybe 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And that was the last time I ever saw her or spoke to her. And I mean, like literally, I just tore into this person because they were treating my kid almost like an experiment, right? And I'm sitting here, I'm like, you guys literally don't understand who you're dealing with. Like, I can reverse engineer this thing on the fly. You can't, like, you literally can't tell me that you don't know when she's going to run out of morphine, for instance, right?
Right. Right.
There should be no shortage of morphine in this room. I literally said, from this day forward, I expect there to be a bag of morphine until she's discharged,
Right.
sitting there. And if she needs it, she gets it immediately.
Yeah, you
There's
don't
no
want to see your
waiting.
daughter in pain, right?
Right.
Yeah.
She's what, alive for 3 days, and she's in, excruciating pain. And I told, I guess there was a benefit to what I went through younger, right? Because my sister went through renal failure, right? And
Oh
I
my goodness.
and I, I ended up donating my kidney to her. She's fine today. She's living a great life and whatnot, totally fine. But seeing how my mom had to navigate, right, this world, as we're not a wealthy family, we're a poor family, right? My dad actually, in fact, few months beforehand, lost his job, you know? Um, and so that was an extraordinarily stressful time. But my mom learned, and I learned in return, is that in that situation, the social worker and the nurse actually have the most power in that situation, right? If you want a doctor removed, if you want a team removed, or if you want them transferred to another unit or whatever it is, those two people, they're tasked with making it happen no matter what. And so, in this situation, right, when that doctor was basically trying to use my kid as an experiment, when it's a relatively minor issue that she was going through, right? It was a pneumothorax, little hole in the lung. She had, she was a little bit early, right? So they just had to wait for it to heal. It wasn't like anything crazy, but for a new parent, that's extraordinarily stressful.
Scary. Yeah, super
That
scary.
that was by far the most scared I've ever been in my life, like by a long shot. But going through everything that I went through, I just went to the nurse and I said, I don't want that doctor ever seeing my kid again. Like, if she's in this room, she's seeing other kids, she's not allowed to cross this threshold of the room, and she's not allowed to have any input. And they literally said, well, what if she's the only one? I'm like, you better call in someone else. Like, I
Right.
don't, I don't care. She is not allowed to touch my kid. She's not allowed to treat my kid. And I was very clear with them. I was like, I want only these three nurses to be on her nursing team, right? So we know the nurse during the day, we know the nurse in the afternoon, we know the nurse at night. And that doctor is not allowed. And it was done, right? Everything that I requested was done. But if I went and like started a fight with that doctor, now they're going to have problems with me, and I can't even remember how I got down this path, right? But it's that unknown that you kind of have to dive into and embrace. That's when you actually make the real progress. That's when you actually make the real change in your life and everyone else's life.
I agree with that. If you were to think back on that, Joe, the that particular doctor, do you think part of it was attitude?
Yeah,
Like the
100%.
yeah,
Because she was the only one that was just like openly smiling at me as she was saying what she was going to do. Like there was like no empathy, right?
right,
And I'm sitting here like, I understand you may have a positive personality, right? But there is 6 other doctors that see my kid every single day, and none of them approach me in that manner, right?
right,
Like
right,
when my sister was sick and she had dozens of doctors, none of them approached us that way, right? It was very serious, concise, to the point, very exact about what was going on. There was no questions about what was going on and what was going to happen. There was none, right? And it was totally her attitude, because as soon as she approached me from that way, I was like, oh yeah, she's not ready to handle my kid, because she's not ready to handle me, because I'm not going to be all like jolly with you, like, no, get out of the room. Like, let the
right.
adults let the adults handle it.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, and to tie it back to cyber. Um, I think this is part two of like the mistake that a lot of the vendor and the consulting community makes. They want to talk at the CSO, or
Mm,
they want to talk at the security people. And I see some people that are out there that are big voices, and they're always like, CISOs should get fired for this, or they say like, they just need to get in line and adapt. And and I don't think any of that's useful. I think it's all like that doctor you're referring to, right? It's
Yeah.
just like that sort of like, and they're just alienating the community. And I think we are in a place where there needs to be more compassion, right? We're in a place where there needs to be more of like, I'm relating to you. Your job sucks, right? Like it sucks. It's hard. And, mainly you're responsible for a problem that you partially own, right? Lots of other people own the problem. And maybe, like if 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 people learn from your example, and approached others in the field with that sort of grace and empathy, then I think we would see incredible changes, and maybe some of that frustration and that anxiety that's prominent um, in our community would start to go away a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just everybody being a little bit nicer with each other and relating to each other, and
Yeah.
I'd love to see that personally.
Yeah. It's fascinating when you approach insecurity, when you approach things from the like customer obsessed mentality,
Yeah.
right? You're not looking to get through whatever the end user is talking about so that you can prescribe them a solution, right? You're not like being solution oriented in that way, but you're more focused on actually, hearing them out, right? The first
Right.
thing that I ask people when I'm about to ask something of someone, right? I ask them, well, why don't you tell me why it is this way? Right? Because I'm probably missing something here. Why
Right.
why was it like this 20 years ago or whatever it is, right? And learning what the decisions were, why they made it, the evolution of a system or a domain and the environment and whatnot, right? Coming at it from that perspective also opens up the recipient of what you're going to say, right? Like the recommendations, because there was many times when there's been many times where people will be very attached to a system or a part of the network that's critical, right? Because they feel like, hey, I really contributed to the success of the IT team here at this company, and it's going to be like this forever, right? Well, when you're meeting them in the middle there and saying, "Hey, you create a great system. You create a great environment. Like it's top of the line for sure. 10 years ago it was top of the line, right? Now with different advents of like zero trust and whatnot, we should restructure it just a little bit, make it even better, right? It's really great. We're just making it a little bit better, and it fits our future endeavors, right? That's how you approach it. But if you approach it from the perspective of, oh, you're wrong, this is a antiquated technology, you've already lost them. You've
That's
already
right.
lost them. You're going to entrench them, and they're never gonna change for you.
You want to hear a great story? Over the weekend, I was having an issue with one of my websites. It's hosted on the Wix platform, and it was a weird issue. I couldn't figure out like what was going on. Normally, I can sort of figure those things out and fix them on my own. And so I reached out to the support channel, and the support channel is normally a phone based channel. You can get a human on the phone,
Huh.
but on the weekends, it's through messaging. Right? It's a messaging platform. And this woman over on the support team at Wix, she picks up and she starts interfacing with them. It's like, by the way, thank you so much for helping me on a Saturday morning. And then we just started this nice dialogue back and forth with each other. And it got to a point where she said, Bob, normally I have to elevate this to somebody higher up than me, but I really want to help you. And I think I know how to help you with your problem. And I'm not going to elevate it, but let's try something. And so she gave me this thing to try. She walked me through it step by step. We got through it. It actually fixed the problem.
Hmm.
Right. But normally that would have been escalated to somebody else. I would have had to waited for somebody else to contact me later in the day. But I think that politeness, that polite exchange between the two of us, a little bit of gratitude, she was probably like, you know what, I'm going to help this guy.
Yeah.
And she did. And it was great. My experience with Wix support was outstanding. And And I just feel like those little things matter, to your point. You know what I mean? Those little pleasantries matter. It's, we're all humans at the end of the day. We all want to be thanked for the work that we're doing. We all want to feel good about what we're doing. One of the reasons I loved horticulture is because it has a lot of instant gratification. You plant a bunch of plants in a field, you get to see what you just did, right? It looks great. The field's been
Hmm.
tilled. You can go back and see the perfectly straight lines. So I love instant gratification, but I think most of us really in general want instant gratification in the things that we do.
Yeah.
And add in some pleasantries, and I think all of a sudden you got this success thing happening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, Robert, I apologize. We didn't really dive into X analytics, but why don't you tell my audience, a little bit like an overview of like what you guys do, what you specialize in,
Yeah,
and
sure.
how you help other companies.
Yeah. By the way, Joe, this has been a fun conversation. So thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
just summary wise, with X Analytics, I'll tell you like where the idea came from and where we are today. So years ago, I was in a board meeting for a large bank. I was assisting the CISO in the board meeting, and for the stuff that we prepared, we did a great job preparing the materials, but it was not received well in the board. And it wasn't because they were upset about the information. They just didn't know what we were talking about, right? Like clearly they had no idea what we were talking about. And so I left that board meeting and I said, there has to be a better way. There has to be a way to communicate cyber in a way that people can understand and a way that they can make sound decisions from. And so about a year later, I left that job that I had at the time and joined up with some partners at X Analytics, and we created the concept of X Analytics. And the idea was, could we build something that simplifies cyber risk management? And could we build something that allows people, whether they're novices in cyber or not, to understand what the risk condition looks like and then where they can make decisions with ease, right? That was the concept. And so we achieved that concept. We built what we wanted to build. We continue to iterate on that idea as time goes on. And, we continue to advance our capabilities. But fundamentally, that's what X Analytics is. X Analytics is a cloud-based platform that helps folks simplify cyber risk management. And the way that we do that is we have a really simple structure to help them build a profile for their business. That profile gets married with back-end data, which is historical loss data, historical threat data, historical probability data. And it serves up a really easy to understand concept of their cyber risk condition. And they can see if they're a NIST CSF organization, they can see what their world looks like in NIST CSF. If they're CIS, CSC, the critical security controls, they can see what their world looks like under that context. But then we take it further and we weave in the elements of governance, we weave in the elements of optimized transfer, optimized mitigation, so that ultimately organizations can see that the decisions that they're making is leading to an improved outcome in their overall cybersecurity posture. And 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 the goal there is to give the CISOs a pat on the back, right? The CSOs are doing all these wonderful things. From the very beginning, they can see those wonderful things by looking at the difference between inherent risk and residual risk and the current sit that they're in. But then as time goes on, they continue to show those trend lines and how those trend lines are improving based on the wonderful projects that they're implementing within their organization. So it's really to serve up not only an honest perspective of their business, but also to make sure that the CSO is getting the compliments for the hard work that he and she are doing for the business that they work for.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, it's really it's interesting. It's like providing context, right? Where wouldn't normally be in a very tangible way.
Yeah, and it's represented in a financial lens, right? So, and that's not the only way. You can look at like how much of NIST have I achieved? What is my NIST tier achievement? Between 1 and 4. So it serves up other sorts of metrics that they could draw that perspective. But the perspective that we do put forward is a financial one, right? So they can say my cyber risk problem is equivalent to 1% of revenue. Now, is that a big deal? Maybe, maybe not, right? That's unique to every company. but it allows them to take that understanding and also compare it to other operational risk inside the business. So, in this past year, if you're comparing your cyber condition and it's 1% of revenue, but inflation is 7% of revenue, well, you're probably going to focus more on inflationary problems, right? Going back to the economic stuff that we were talking about. If you're dealing with a company that has a lot of shoplifting, and if shoplifting's 5% of revenue, well, then that's going to be more important to the business to address shoplifting than the cyber problem. On the other hand, if cyber is the thing that is most significant, it's 2, 3, 4% of revenue, then it allows you to compare that with the other operational risks, to have a very honest conversation with the leadership to say, you know what, maybe we need to invest more in cyber. It's our number 2 or number 1 problem in our company. How would you guys like us to proceed? Right. And that's just a very open and honest conversation. So that's the goal, right? Is to really sort of simplify it, put it in a language and a context that everybody in the business can understand, compare it to other things that are happening in the business, and then ultimately make the right types of decisions.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's definitely an area that's needed for sure in the industry. Well, Robert, I really enjoyed our conversation, but before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you if they wanted to connect, and then where they can find your company if they wanted to learn more.
Sure. I mean, you can easily find me on LinkedIn, Robert Vecchio. There might be more than one. There's a doctor out of Los Angeles that also has a Robert Vecchio name. And there's also an author of children's books. So there's 3 of us out there that I know of. But Robert Vecchio, you'll see me because I'll have the cybersecurity tag associated with my LinkedIn. And then our web address is xanalytics.com. It's x-analytics.com. So we're really easy to find. Joe, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it. I'll definitely have to have you back on, in the future.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you, Joe.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.